This video is going to explain to you how to navigate through the new process and the new rules. Make sure you don't get taken advantage of.
Now there are four people involved in this process. First we have the seller, then we have the seller agent, then we have the buyer, and we have the buyer agent. Now to make the math simple and easy to understand, I'm going to have a house price of $100. Each of the seller agent and the buyer agent are going to get a $3 commission. I'm going to disregard all the other closing costs and everything right now just to make it easy to understand. Public service announcement alert. Commissions are always negotiable. So the numbers that I'm using here are just for illustration to make it easy to understand and do the math easier.
First, I'm going to explain the old way, the way it used to work before August of 2024.
So the seller wants $100 for his house. The seller and the seller's agent, they agree on a total amount of commission of $6. The seller is going to pay the seller's agent $6 at the close of escrow. Now the seller's agent promises the buyer agent $3 at the close of escrow. So they're only going to keep $3 of that $6. Now in the MLS, when the house is listed, the price of the house is going to be $106. That $6 has got to cover this guy's $3 and this guy's $3. Notice that the buyer offered $106 for the house. The seller took that money, gave him $6. He gave this guy $3, and he walked away with $100. This is what happens at the end of escrow. Now notice that the buyer paid $106 for a house, and that included $6 in commissions that they were never aware of. To the buyer, it was always a $106 house, but the seller only got $100. They never had any awareness or control over the amount of the commissions.
That lack of opportunity to negotiate your commission, that was the core issue in that lawsuit. Now, these are the three rules that we have to abide by now that came out of that lawsuit.
Rule number 1, the seller and the seller agent, they must negotiate and agree on a seller agent commission only, and that's done through a listing contract. This agreement happens up front before anything else happens. Rule number 2, the buyer and the buyer's agent must negotiate and agree on the buyer agent commission only. That's done with a buyer broker agreement, which is a legally binding contract. Now this must happen before the buyer agent can show property or make an offer on a property. This buyer is now obligated to pay this amount to the buyer's agent somewhere, somehow at close of escrow. Rule number 3, the buyer agent cannot receive more or less than this amount no matter what happens later in negotiations.
Now we know that the seller is going to pay the seller's agent directly at the close of escrow, but who pays the buyer's agent? That could happen a multitude of different ways for many different reasons. This first process I'm going to take you through is probably the most common method right now because it mimics the old way we used to do things and everybody just is comfortable with it.
The seller asks $106 for the house, knowing that they have to pay the seller agent this $3 commission. But in addition, they're also willing to pay $3 to the buyer agent to cover his commission. But that has to be negotiated later. They calculated it into this number. The buyer offers $106 for the house. Part of that offer is another form, the seller compensation addendum, that says the seller agrees to pay the buyer agent this $3 commission as part of the whole deal. Now, everybody agrees. The buyer pays the seller $106. The seller pays him $3 and also pays him $3 because of this seller compensation addendum.
And here's another way it can go. Not very many agents are doing it this way right now, but I think it's going to become the new normal. And I think I'm going to start using it on my own listings from now on.
The seller does not include the buyer agent commission in the asking price of the house. He only asks 103 because he's still got to cover this $3, but he's not counting on covering the buyer agent $3. He's figuring that the lower asking price is going to make the house more attractive to all the buyers out there. Now the buyer finds their dream home and it's only 103. So he makes an offer of 103 and he asks, of course, for the seller compensation addendum of $3. Well, that wasn't calculated into the price. So the seller says, no, we are not going to accept your price there. However, we'll do that if you bump your offer up to 106, then we'll pay the $3 to your buyer agent. At the close of escrow, the buyer pays $106. The seller pays the seller agent $3, pays the buyer agent $3, ends up paying $106. Of course, the seller walks away with the $100. Notice that the $106 was paid on a house that was listed at $103. That's pretty weird.
Now, in any of these negotiation paths, what happens when the buyer's agent commission is higher or lower than the seller is willing to pay?
Now, for instance, what if the buyer and the buyer agent agreed on a $2 commission and not the $3 commission? Well, he's willing to pay $3. He cannot accept more than $2. In this case, I would offer $105. Let's say that the buyer agent commission is $3. The seller is only willing to pay $2. In that case, the buyer has to pay directly to the buyer's agent one when they buy the house for $106. The seller gives him $3 and only $2 to the buyer's agent. He should have negotiated this down to $105 to make up for that extra dollar he had to put in, and the buyer still walks with only $100. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Now, all these different situations all have an impact on the ability of a buyer to get a loan. It might be the size of the down payment or the amount of the loan. If they can qualify and appraise the house so that they can get the loan to cover the buyer's agent commission, they're essentially financing the buyer's agent commission. They're not paying it out of pocket. That makes it a lot easier for the buyer to buy the house, which makes it easier for the seller to sell the house. Well, sellers then should be motivated to pay for the buyer's agent commission and negotiate whatever it takes to make that work. Every step needs to be negotiated, and you're going to need a clever agent to guide you through all the different options and strategies along the way. And I know it would be a lot easier if you could just go back to the old way where you just had one price that you paid, like buying a gallon of gas or a loaf of bread or something. But now you've got control of every step along the way, which means you have to control it every step along the way. With great power comes great responsibility, somebody once said. You're going to have questions and you're going to need advice. So talk to your agent or leave me a question in the comments below.